Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to RCSLT's webinar, Giving Voice to Trans People. So today we're joined by a number of speakers, but before I begin, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Kamini Gadhok, and I'm Chief Executive at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. So I'm really pleased that today we have Dr. Sean Pert, who's Senior Clinical Lecturer and Consultant Speech and Language Therapist at the University of Manchester and Indigo Gender Service. We're also joined today by Zane Robinson, who's Community Program, I'm just trying to move this along a bit so that I can see you, Community Program Manager and Trans Program Coordinator at LGBT Foundation. Welcome to both of you today. Before we start, I've got a number of housekeeping points that I just want to make. So just to say that we have RCSLT staff on hand to help with any technical queries you can get in touch with them via the chat button. So please use the chat button if you really can't hear anything, if you're finding things difficult because of technical reasons. But if you have any questions, it'd be really helpful if you use the Q&A button. So please use that button for questions so that we have an ability to have a look at what's coming in through the Q&A button for the speakers today. If there's a question that you particularly want to pose to either Sean or Zane, please can you make that clear? That would be really helpful. Just to let you all know that this event is being recorded and we're going to make sure it's available on the RCSLT website alongside the presentation slides that you're going to be seeing today. At the end of the session, you're going to have a pop-up button that will come up and it'll be a quick poll that you can complete straight away, as well as afterwards an evaluation form that will be more detailed. The event itself is going to run for about 60 minutes, and if you do want to tweet, the Twitter handle we'd like you to use is #RCSLTwebinar. So just to remind you, do use social media to promote what you're hearing and seeing. So I'm not going to go through these in detail, but here on the slide, we've got an overview of the aims and objectives for this event. Just leave that up there for a second. Okay, so I'm going to pass straight over to you, Sean. So over to you, Sean, to present, do the first.
Thanks very much, Kamini, and thank you for that introduction. My name is Sean Pert, and my pronouns are he, him. And as I say, I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to talk about the work that we're doing with trans and non-binary people to bring about voice and communication change. Next slide, please. So just some background of because it's important to bear in mind that the reason that I am so keen that everyone is educated about trans and non-binary people is because of the amazing challenges that they face, both in society and in accessing healthcare. So I've put some statistics here that are really shocking, and they just show the challenges that people are facing. And healthcare, also people have heard negative comments from healthcare professionals and in higher education. So as a trans or non-binary person, it's really easy to think that the world is against you because there's so much negativity in society. And this linked in with so-called debates about the existence of trans people really adds to the societal minority stress that individuals experience. And I'm old enough to be familiar with this because in the AIDS crisis, gay men were demonized, and it seems that tabloid press and sensationalist headline seekers seek to portray trans and non-binary people in a negative light. So it's really beholden on us as professionals, not only to be kind of open and accepting, and most people think that they are, which is great, but actually to make efforts to be anti-discriminatory, to be pro-trans, and to demonstrate that on things like social media and in the way that we address professional practice. Next slide, please. So alongside that general level of discrimination and prejudice, there are huge practical challenges getting help and advice as a trans and non-binary person. So there are long waiting lists. So I'll go on to that shortly, but people have been waiting up to 5 years for access to treatment, which if you have feelings of dysphoria that you want to address from help from a range of professionals, then you are stuck with those feelings, and they can really impact on people's mental health and well-being. And this also encourages people to seek non-professional advice. And I know there's lots of kind of weird and wonderful advice out there just on voice and communication. And that's one of the reasons that I was very keen to get involved, to fill that gap with professional voice care that was likely to lead to long-term and healthy change, and not encourage people to do quick tricks and techniques that might lead to vocal abuse and might actually be counterproductive for people. There's also a real lack of awareness of trans masculine people and trans men, and this part of the community is often excluded from the conversation because people just don't notice them. I've got friends who are trans men, and I've had a conversation with somebody in a cafe, and someone said, well, there are no trans people in here. And what they meant was there are no trans women that I can see, because these trans men blended in wonderfully. And also, that's the key point. People say, you should know about trans and non-binary voice if you're working with the client group. However, it's really important to remember that trans people have strokes, trans people have children, trans people experience Parkinson's disease. This is not, it's something that everyone should be aware of, just in case you encounter a family with a trans person as part of that family. So during the pandemic, this has really compounded these difficulties. People may be living with somebody, maybe parents, maybe a partner that they don't want to live with because they're not accepted, they're not able to live their authentic self. So 17% felt unsafe where they were living, and almost 2/3 of people needed help from mental health services. And interestingly, people sought services and supports from LGBT friendly organisations, because that idea of a safe space that you can be yourself and not have to worry about outing yourself, that people will just understand your situation, have empathy, is enormously important. Thank you. Next slide. So this is a large word, cisheteronormativity. It's not there to test your ability to clap out syllables, although I might be testing you later. This is something that's built into society, and as a gay man, I noticed this. I met a new member of staff at the university, and they assumed when I was talking about my partner, they assumed it was a woman, and they assumed we were married. So it's this idea that everyone is the same gender they were allocated at birth, and the idea that everyone is heterosexual, and this could be just because that's the way the human mind works. We tend to start with stereotypes and build on experience from that. So you have to work hard to overcome your lazy brain's way of organizing the world, because that's the kind of way people look at you and try and make a decision, and that's the way it is. So the other thing really is that people assume from very old terminology that people want to change sex. And that's definitely inverted commas, because that's this idea that someone wants to assume a complete, undetectable version of one of the genders, whether that be the male gender or the female gender. The problem with that is that lots of people don't conform to those ideas. It involves a lot of stereotyping, and that lots and lots of people increasingly are exploring their identities in ways that don't conform to that binary. And I'll be really interested to talk to Zane at the end of this, because I know he's got some real insight into this area. So it's not the aim of voice and communication therapy to achieve passing. You might need to do that as a trans or non-binary person for your safety, which is sad. And obviously that's something we can help with, but it's more about being comfortable with yourself. So I have a menu of different kind of things that we can offer, but they're not necessarily things that I would recommend people to incorporate. It's up to them. It's their voice. They are the expert on them. And we are in the business of co-production. So working alongside trans and non-binary people to achieve their aims, not the aims I come up with. It's not my business to set those aims. So it might be anywhere along the gender spectrum, or the idea of gender might not be useful at all. So this requires us to really rethink the way that we frame identity and voice and communication. Next slide, thank you. So to address the waiting list, NHS England have commissioned 3 new primary care services, and I am leading the speech and language therapy in the Indigo gender service, which is based in Greater Manchester. And those services are currently commissioned to address the waiting lists of people who have currently been referred, and in my case, live in Greater Manchester. And so the other ones are in London and in Cheshire and Merseyside. That only brings up the number of gender identity clinics up from 7 to 10. So it's still very specialised and difficult to access area. So the pandemic has brought us both challenges and advantages. So we didn't expect to set up a completely online service, but we have done. But that's also meant that trans people feel confident being themselves in their own homes and don't have to travel. So they may be worried about the trip over to the clinic. We can use technology and help people to download apps to monitor their own progress. We can develop videos, which we have done for the Indigo website, where we can demonstrate techniques. So people on our program can go and look at those videos and remind themselves of what they should be doing. And there's lots of opportunities in breakout rooms to do one-to-one, one-to-two work, and to encourage students. So we have students on placement virtually who are also helping us deliver care and learning so that they feel more confident that when they qualify. And being able to pair trans and non-binary people with students to give them that one-to-one support as well has helped address their anxiety when they're working, maybe for the first time trying out some new voice with other trans people that they've not met before. Next slide, please. So what's the role of SLTs? Well, we may have none. You might be perfectly happy with your voice, and that's okay. Who am I to say that a woman with a low voice or a man with different non-verbal communication is unacceptable in society? It is not my life. It is not my voice and communication. However, most people, around 3/4 of people, do seek advice from us. And what they're doing is aligning their voice and communication to their self-image. So not, as I said earlier, changing from one gender to another, but aligning and avoiding this stereotyping and cis-heteronormativity, and just choosing things that they feel portrays themselves authentically. And we talk about authentic voice. We have a multidisciplinary team, so we work with talking therapies if people need help with their mental health, with GPs who can prescribe hormones, and we have support from the Nottingham Gender Identity Centre for things like surgery. And we can signpost to things like smoking cessation, which is important for people, for example, on hormones, who might be at higher risk of having blood clots. Next slide. So how do we check that we're meeting the high requirements of our profession and for our clients? Well, we make sure that we are culturally competent. So there's lots of discussion amongst the team. Indigo employs care navigators who are all from trans and non-binary backgrounds. So we would run past aspects of our service with them. We have a co-production group, which allows us to check those things out as well. RCSLT have a professional framework for this area, which you can progress through under supervision. There's formal clinical supervision in our service, and me and my staff are also signed up for the University of London PG DIP, where we learn about things like trans identity in society, and more specifically about the multidisciplinary team. Next slide, please. So there is the UK Baggis Association, and the current president is our very own Matthew Mills, who is a speech and language therapist. So that's great that we have an SLT leading the multidisciplinary team's professional organisation. And we had a highly successful conference just the other week. We have a clinical excellence network, and again we had an online SEM meeting last week, which was very well attended and allowed us to share best practice. And there's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, that sets standards, and that's evolving all the time. Next slide, please. So we should be aiming for authentic voice, not a passable voice. And that's a voice that can be used safely and without effort, reflects people's identity, that they find appealing, that doesn't feel like a performance, and that will eliminate these feelings of dysphoria. And that might change over time as people explore their identities. So you'll be able to download these slides later, but my main point about this is that there are many aspects to voice and communication, that body language and facial expression, for example, are very popular in our groups. People want to know about that. And almost everyone comes wanting to change their pitch, but often we change their minds and talk about combining that with things like resonance to make it more authentic sounding, and think about who you're going to use these vocal changes with, and making sure that people have lots of practice and coming to consider things like their bodies. So if they're a very tall person or a very short person, is that voice going to kind of go well with that person? Is it going to meet the identity that they want to portray? So really exploring this together and coming up with therapy aims together rather than me advising any particular area. So we can these days use technology to look at frequency, for example, pitch, as I've mentioned earlier. I don't like people to focus on that too much, but one of the things I do point out is the huge amounts of overlap. So there are cis women with low voices, there are cis men with higher voices, and it's not about just pitch, it's combining all those aspects we saw earlier on the model. Next slide, please. And this is about resonance, and this adds authenticity to the voice. And that's something very difficult for people to master. So one of the main techniques we use is playing with the voice, enjoying, discovering, and finding out what your vocal performance can change, and having lots of fun in groups and in small activities to discover what people's current presentation is like and how that can be changed, and whether they want to keep that change. So intonation, if someone changes pitch too low or too high, they won't have room to move that bounce in their voice. So that's really important that people understand that they need this leeway in their pitch range, as well as just achieving a particular mythical pitch. Next slide, please. And as I said, vocal exploration and play, thinking about your identity, avoiding that stereotyping. And I really strongly recommend Matthew Mills and Gilly Stoneham's books to really read more about those exploration techniques and thinking about identity and how we help people to explore that through voice, which is so closely aligned to identity. So group work, people are sometimes surprised we do group work. It's worth noting that most people say, I don't want to do group work, but then they do some group work and go, oh, this is really good fun. We really enjoyed it. We really liked it. So it's about supporting people to take risks with voice, but have that support. So we have volunteers and who are SLT students and students on placement to help them to take those risks. And some service users might need help beforehand, before they're ready for that situation. Next slide, please. So I got feedback from all my service users when I was doing a voluntary model, and they all really enjoyed having students. It was great to get feedback, and our students were very patient people, which was very nice to hear. And the students all reported developing clinical skills in those initial information gathering and intervention techniques. So as I said, we don't work in isolation, and we had an online team building day when we launched, and it's really important that all the cultural knowledge in our team is shared, and we can easily access support across the team. Next slide, please. So how to move forward if you're interested in this area. Become a trans and non-binary ally, really kind of express, wear your badges, make people feel comfortable, have difficult conversations that might make you feel uncomfortable. Join the SEN, we're very welcome of new members. Look at the competency framework and experiment with your own voice. You know, it's really important that we're able to, can you, for example, experiment to, if you're a cis woman, to lower your voice, change your resonance. How does that make you feel? Really important to play around with that. And attend awareness and training sessions about LGBTQ+ issues, and think about volunteering, because that's a good way of shadowing and finding out more. Okay, so that's a quote from the Mills and Stoneman book from a person with lived experience, and really kind of emphasising that voice is about identity. And whose identity is it? Well, it's the service users, it's not ours. Thank you. So thank you for listening to me. I know that's not going to give you all the information, but there's a reference list, and you'll be able to see that downloaded slides. And there's some links to the organisations I mentioned in the talk. And now I'm very happy to introduce Zane. I got to know Zane through working through LGBT Foundation, and I'm really looking forward to hear what Zane has got to say and the questions afterwards. Over to you, Zane.
Hello, I'm Zane. Hello. I use they or he pronouns, and I am the Community Programs Manager and Trans Program Coordinator at LGBT Foundation. I will be approaching this talk in a few different angles. I'll be talking a bit about what work I do, what LGBT Foundation is, and also I'll be approaching this talk from the angle of a service user or a past service user of speech and language therapy. I'm a transmasculine non-binary person, so that's my sort of experience with speech and language therapy. I hope it kind of illuminates some of the challenges that trans and non-binary people can face. As Sean mentioned before, I fall into the category of people who don't stereotypically access speech and language therapy, which might give you an angle that you may not have heard before with regards to trans and non-binary people accessing speech and language therapy. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a bit of background about the trans program at LGBT Foundation. We've been operating since 2015, following consultation with community members to figure out what people wanted from LGBT Foundation. Originally, we were funded by the National Lottery Community Fund, and for the first 4 years, and then moved on to different funders in the future. We aim to keep evolving to meet the needs of trans and non-binary people across Greater Manchester and nationally. LGBT Foundation, while based in Greater Manchester, does operate on a national level. Nowadays, we see well over 1,000 trans and non-binary and intersex service users each year through our services and events. And we make sure on the trans program that everything that we're doing across LGBT Foundation is inclusive. So it's not like the trans program is the one that holds all the trans, non-binary and intersex people. We make sure that that is done across the LGBT Foundation. So that's how we support there. We host all sorts of events across the board. At the moment, all of them are online. We're still operating digital events, which has been quite exciting. And we work to upskill people within the organization as well as outside. We support with training and other needs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So that's kind of glossing over a bit of my work and how I approach this from the professional point of view. As Sean mentioned, we've worked together for a number of years in delivering voice and communication services for free to trans and non-binary people across Greater Manchester and beyond. As Sean also mentioned, there are massive waiting lists for gender services across the UK. So Sean developed a wonderful weekend course where trans and non-binary people can access for free and work with Sean and SLT students to develop a voice that is authentic for them, as opposed to one that is very rigid. So moving on to my experiences, I accessed speech and language therapy what feels like a really long time ago now, 2014. And this was before I got a prescription for testosterone. It was something I wanted to do to try and lower my voice, but also make me feel more confident within my voice. I attended most of the course, but I eventually dropped out early, which I'll go into in more detail in a second, to also give you a bit of an idea of where I was coming from. I was 18. I'd been transferred from the under 18 service into the adult services of the gender clinics, and I was accessing things like speech and language therapy, the gender clinics, various other things by myself. At the time, I was just going to appointments like this by myself, which means that I was a young person who was advocating for myself within speech and language therapy as well. Next slide, please. Some of the positives from the experiences that I had, I was shown better posture to support a lot of chronic pain that I was experiencing. I still experience chronic pain, but the things that I was taught with regards to posture actually had a knock-on effect with helping me manage that. The posture was actually to do with how I presented myself and presenting myself in a quote-unquote more masculine way. But that was kind of something that happened as a result of that. I developed better breathing techniques. I was binding my chest, so reducing the appearance of my chest at the time. And it meant that I had I've developed a way of breathing that compensated for that. I was, as I said, I was 18 and trying to buy these things out of pocket. At the time, there wasn't that much information about how to bind safely, which is something that actually I get to work on now and make sure that people are clued up on how to do that safely. And because of accessing SLT, I developed ways of being able to breathe, which, you need to be able to breathe, useful. And also I learned some techniques that could lower the pitch of the voice before I went on to testosterone. So moving my tongue further back in my mouth, things like that, and how to sustain that lower voice without damaging my vocal cords or anything. Next slide, please. But as I mentioned, I didn't actually complete the course, and it was something that I was up late at night thinking about whether I was going to complete it or not, because I wanted to get a change in my voice, but there were certain things that I was up against when accessing speech and language therapy. So I had to kind of balance the fact that I wanted to have a deeper voice, mostly, as Sean mentioned before, mostly for my own safety. As a young person out and about advocating for myself, I didn't want to be clocked, shall we say, as trans, because I was afraid for myself, basically, and also for my own comfort. I wanted my voice to be deeper. However, I was up against some things within those sessions that ultimately made me think, no, it's not worth the hassle of having to travel all this way to advocate for myself, for me to never know whether I could trust this person. So to start off with, the process wasn't collaborative. At no point was I really asked what I wanted to sound like. I was told this is what men sound like, and this is how you need to sound. This is how you need to present. There were a few quotes that really stuck with me for a really long time around you don't want to sound like a gay man. This is in 2014. This wasn't, that, I know I said it was a while ago, but it wasn't that long ago. That really put me off. At the time, I was dating somebody who I'm still with, actually, who is a trans man himself. So I identify as gay as well. So what does a gay man sound like? And also, why can't I sound like a gay man as somebody who is gay and masculine? I was misgendered the moment I walked in the room on my very first appointment. I was referred to as a girl, and this was not properly apologized for. It was just blamed on the fact that my voice was so high, so that's why they misgendered me, which meant that they were kind of blaming me for being misgendered, which didn't feel great and didn't fill me with much faith in the rest of the sessions. I had a lot of inappropriate comments that were nothing to do with my voice around how I passed. I had some really bizarre ones around what my clothing choices were, which were more so than you'd think. Like you'd probably assume by that I was coming in something very feminine, which is also okay for me to do. But it was very much anything that wasn't hyper masculine, which isn't something we do with cisgender men. So why would I need to compromise my identity to be recognized as someone who's masculine? I remember I had this bag that had a cartoon character on, and I was told that I wasn't trying hard enough because I had a cartoon character on my bag, which was one of the more bizarre ones that I experienced. Next slide, please. So this was just actually a few of the examples of why I ended up not going to the sessions again. But the result of that experience meant that I was quite distrustful of speech and language therapists and services in the future for a good number of years. I certainly wanted to access again, but I thought that they couldn't do anything for me because they had proven that they had a very rigid idea in my mind of what my voice was supposed to sound like. And as somebody who identified as queer, I identified as non-binary, that didn't suit me very well. I didn't want to disappear and just become just be a cisgender man. That's not my experience. That's not what I want. I don't want to just conform to this very hyper-masculine identity. And it made me think, no, okay, well, anything that is not that hyper-masculine or hyper-feminine presentation mustn't be for me. And for a while, I had this idea that actually speech and language therapy was enforcing this really rigid gender binary, which I now know isn't the case, and it can be done in a really sensitive and co-productive way. But that's how I felt for a number of years. And there was a huge emotional impact. It really, really wore away at me while I was going to the sessions. And it wasn't just speech and language therapists that I became fearful of. There were a number of health professionals that I became very fearful of being open about. Many health professionals I wasn't open about being non-binary with because I didn't trust that they'd take me seriously. And there's plenty of other health professionals that after I started taking testosterone, I just didn't tell them I was trans because I just didn't want to have those conversations if it wasn't necessary. I deliver training to this day. I deliver very long training, and because of a range of different things, I can lose my voice quite often after extensive speaking. I have a lot of other issues that were diagnosed later on with regards to my vocal cords, which may well have been to do with long-term unhealthy binding as opposed to the healthy binding that I found out about myself later on and now teach people on. But basically I have a buildup of mucus, which really makes my voice quite difficult to work with sometimes. And a number of other things that mean that once I started taking testosterone, I wasn't sure what to do with this new voice. And yeah, it means that if I had trusted the person. It wasn't actually that long after I was taking these sessions that I started testosterone. And actually, if I'd continued the course, I might have been able to develop ways of working with this new voice that I had. But unfortunately, because of the experiences, I quit early, so I didn't get to benefit from that. The other result, which I don't think is that obvious sometimes, is that trans communities do talk to each other. A lot of marginalized communities will talk about the services that they access to other community members. It's a way of being defensive and protective of other people. It's a way to make sure that you're not about to go somewhere that you're going to get hurt. And especially during the current time period where trans and non-binary people are criticized so often and are attacked so often, communities can become really protective of each other and make sure that they're not about to send their friends, their community members somewhere that they might get hurt, or they might be uncomfortable or misgendered, or somebody just won't understand them. So communities talk to each other and they're very, very linked to each other. So certainly over the years, I've spoken about this individual and told other people, don't go there, because this was my experience. And it means you get a reputation with those communities very quickly. It's, you know, if it wasn't somebody who was that community member, they might put a review on Facebook or Google or something, and that might be it. But actually, it can have a massive knock-on impact if you're continually excluding people. Next slide, please. So what did I need? Since then, I've had the joy of working with Sean and his students, as well as many other speech and language therapists. And I've seen that inclusive and wonderful speech and language therapy can be done with trans and non-binary people. And there can be ways to work with people that actually take on board what their experiences are. A collaborative approach would have been really good for developing goals. I could have talked more openly about how I wanted to present, that actually having a stronger voice was actually more important to me. And the fact that I wanted a deeper voice was something that was primarily for my defense in public, but also something that came along with testosterone anyway, and I wanted to know how to work with that. It wasn't something, I didn't want to present as a very stereotypical masculine straight man, because that's not me and I'm not comfortable with that. It could have been an opportunity to develop that as you would do with anybody else. I'd want people to be competent in talking not just about trans and non-binary awareness, but also general LGBT plus awareness. There were many comments that were made that undermined my relationship with my partner, who, as I said, is a man. And I would have liked to have some kind of competency around the needs of that has with regards to my voice and my presentation. Specifically, of course, trans and non-binary awareness, really important. I don't want to get misgendered when I walk in the room. I'm there to present my most authentic self. And if you're reinforcing that I'm not already doing that, then it actually makes me feel worse about myself and makes me feel like that's not something I can change. I'd want an approach that was not assuming that I want, as I've mentioned, a very stereotypical result. I don't want to be just one box, one size fits all approach to what my voice should be. And I'd want someone to be compassionate about how I was approaching. As I mentioned, it's really important to acknowledge that I was a young person advocating for myself, and I was showing additional vulnerability by coming to that service. And I don't need you to, be my parent, but I would have liked for people to acknowledge what kind of vulnerable situation that puts me in, and how I might actually be approaching with a level of compassion that I need that others might not. Yes, people just to acknowledge that this is difficult for me to do as somebody who's trans and non-binary and a young person and queer and approaching by myself. It takes a little bit of work to build up that trust there with people who are in that situation, but it's worth it, and there can be really good outcomes from that. So I guess that's my overall experience. don't worry, this isn't me criticizing all speech and language therapists. I've had wonderful experiences with them since then, but I wanted to share some of the experiences I had that were actually negative and how those impacted me. But I prefer to talk about how we do good practice now. So myself and Sean are going to have a bit of conversation now, I think, about how we can do that.
Thank you, Zane. That's can I just thank you for being so honest? It's really helpful for us to hear these kind of experiences so that we can move on and make services better. So thank you for sharing those experiences with us. I mean, I must say, yeah, I mean, as a gay man, it's quite shocking, isn't it, that people still have these stereotypes? And it's really important to remember that gender identity and sexuality are separate and unrelated aspects of a person's identity. So before I move on to some of the Q&A that's coming in through the chat, so thank you for those questions. Please keep typing them in. I'll get around to those shortly. What really struck me was your constant use of the word trust. And I think it'd be great to maybe just highlight some of the things that, that are kind of bound to happen, really. So you mentioned about misgendering, and I think most people who are professionals, when they first realize the harm that causes, can get so worried about it. So what should people do if you do misgender somebody? What is the way to handle that?
You don't need to make a big deal about it. It was more the response to the misgendering that was the problem, and really impacted me more so than the misgendering itself. By that point, I had a defense mechanism for being misgendered because I was getting misgendered quite regularly. And what is the best approach for the professional who does accidentally misgender is just to apologize and move on. It's like riding a bike. It gets easier as you get used to gendering people correctly and not assuming that. So I in my professional career as well, I also spend a lot of time just reassuring that it's okay, it does happen. Trans and non-binary people also misgender other trans and non-binary people sometimes. You just have to kind of go, oh, okay, sorry about that. Just correct yourself and move on, no problem.
That's lovely, thank you, Zane. I think the other thing that strikes me is that lots of older terms are still hanging around in the literature. So you hear terminology like N to F and things like that. Can you explain why terminology changes and why it's becoming more affirmative over time and why that's a good thing? And I suppose it's a two-part question. So why does that happen? And how can we keep up with that kind of change in terminology?
So it happens because as communities get more, I guess, awareness around them, it helps people to also realize that that's them. They've noticed that is a thing before, and it's why communities seem to grow, and it's why people are saying, why are there so many trans people now? Well, it's because people didn't know it was an option back then. It wasn't actually that long before I accessed speech and language therapy and accessed gender clinics that I found out that being trans was a thing you could be, and also being trans masculine was a thing you could be. It was only a few years prior. So as communities grow, more people are feeding into those conversations and more terminology develops and people figure out ways of communicating their identity. So it's interesting that you bring up FTM and MTF, which is, for those who aren't aware, FTM is female to male and MTF is male to female. So these feel quite outdated now, and even saying it like that, I'm like, oh yeah, that is really outdated. But when I first came out, that was the terminology people were still using. It was just on its way out. And it's a way of, that kind of terminology is a way of making yourself a bit more palatable to people who aren't really aware of trans and non-binary people. It's a way of saying, I'm transitioning to this, and then I'll be male or I'll be female, and I'll be palatable and I'll be normal, quote unquote, and I'll be able to be accepted by society. But then if you think about it a little bit, MTF and FTM are kind of a little bit. So people wanted to think about how we think about gender and how we think about celebrating people, but also making it obvious to people that we're not actually that different, we're still people. So for example, the replacement of those trans woman and trans man, those are descriptors. It's not all one word, it's two different words. It's the descriptor, which is trans, and the noun, which is man or woman. It's a way of describing a man or a woman. Like you would say that somebody is a tall man, but you wouldn't always say that they are a tall man unless that information became relevant. So if you're getting into a car and there's a lot of you trying to get into that car, it might be relevant to say that a man is quite tall because that's going to take up, more room, and it would be useful to call somebody a tall man. You wouldn't necessarily say that your trans man friend is struggling to get into the car because it's not really relevant. So it's a different way about thinking about gender. They're already men and women, but we're just adding the fact that they're trans when it's appropriate to refer to them as a trans man or a trans woman. So that's why it's shifted towards that. It's reaffirming them and not kind of pandering to people and society that isn't like aware of it. It's actually supporting people to become aware and to integrate us into society rather than us just being invisible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Zane. I think that's a really good point to kind of bring us back to that. Hopefully being gay is not the most interesting thing about me, and being trans is not the most interesting thing about you. I would.
Yeah, exactly. It really isn't.
So yeah, we're just people, and that's just one aspect that needs to be considered in things like healthcare. Okay, lovely. So I think that brings us neatly back to if I could bring Kamini back on board, who has some slides to go through.
Thanks so much. Thanks to you, Sean, and to you, Zane, and thanks so much for sharing your experiences and talking it through. There are quite a lot of questions that have come in, but I know that some of them are about the guidance that the RCSLT have. So just wanted to throw up a few slides. Of course, Sean's been heavily involved in the development of many of these elements of work. So just to share these with you. Sean mentioned the SEN, and there's also best practice guidelines that are available on our website, as well as the role of speech therapists, which you've sort of touched on, and information about national policy, as well as other information such as research articles. So if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. Very importantly, the competency framework. Again, Sean mentioned this, so I think it's really important for those people who are looking to work in this area just to have a look at this and see how they can develop their knowledge, skills, and to really develop some opportunity to think about how they might work in this area with the right supervision and support, of course. Next slide, please. This just really talks about, one of the questions was around our work on diversity, and we did have a workshop last year around developing a diverse profession, and as colleagues will know that there was a significant, I guess a step change as a result of Black Lives Matter movement last year. And whilst we are focusing significantly on anti-racism and ethnicity, we're also focusing on other areas of diversity. So this isn't a situation where we're only looking at one or the other. We're looking at the whole area around diversity. So just wanted to reassure colleagues that as part of some of the work we're doing, for example, the new practice placement guidance for students, we're ensuring that all elements of diversity are embedded in that. And I mentioned, or I should mention, our work is looking at intersectionality as well. So it's really important that we continue on this journey together. We do know that we are on a journey. I keep saying that we know we can't, as I call it, sheep dip the profession to understand all of this, but take everybody on a journey with us together so we all learn together. So we're also really pleased to be involved in and support SLT Pride, and I really want to hand back to Sean to talk a bit about that for the next slide. Thank you.
So I'm really delighted that just as I'm becoming deputy chair, that this was serendipitously launched, and I popped along to one of their meetings, and I'm going to talk at the next meeting. in the ways that RCSLT can support this group. So it was incredibly well attended, and it is a grassroots organisation, so people set this up themselves. And I love this little image of this is what an LGBTQ plus SLT looks like. We come in all shapes and sizes, and of course genders and gender identities and sexualities. So they'll be looking for to establish themselves as a committee and to develop a digital space using the Discord interface, which people might be familiar with. But if not, I think there'll be good old-fashioned email updates and newsletters too. So their aim is just to be a supportive space to start with, and then they'll have little sub-projects to undertake. So I strongly encourage you to take part in the UK SLT Pride Network, and I'll certainly be offering any support that I can give to the network.
Thank you very much. So we have had a number of questions. I don't know if Sean and Zane, you've had a chance to have a look at these. Some of them are around waiting lists and waiting times and the issues that are resulting because of that. So people have asked if there's an opportunity to refer to independent practitioners.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that attended my groups initially were trying to access independent practitioners, and we do signpost people to the website for independent practitioners, but I think cost is a major barrier for lots of trans and non-binary people, although trans and non-binary people tend to have much higher professional and educational qualifications than the rest of the population. The level of unemployment really shows the huge amounts of discrimination that they face, in that they tend to be more likely to be unemployed as a result of that discrimination. So of course that doesn't apply to each individual, but I think that's why NHS services are probably so valuable at this stage in the development of services, and it's really important that free services are also readily available.
Thank you, Sean. There are questions here about the impact for children because of long waiting lists and waiting times, and also whether there are always speech therapists that are part of gender identity clinics. I don't know if we can wrap those two questions together.
Yes, and I know there were some gaps, but most services now see LGBT Foundation asked trans and non-binary people what services are important to them, and underneath obvious things like hormones and access to surgeries and hair removal, speech and language therapy was seen to be very important too. So it's certainly a core service that people want to, and as I say, we think we're around, I think 3/4 of our service users at Indigo have asked for advice from voice and communication therapy change. Sorry, what was the other part of that question, Kamini?
It was really about the fact that there are few services for children and the wait for children.
I mean, the ruling at the moment is under appeal, so it's very difficult to talk about children's services because that is currently being appealed. I don't know if you want to jump in and say something about that, Zane.
Yeah, there's for clarity, there's some court cases going on with the under 18 service, so it's difficult to predict what's going on there. I think that it sounds like from the questions I've seen in the chat is that people are keen to support but just don't know where to start. Great. I was saying before the session that I'm very here for people who just admit, I don't actually know what I'm doing here. How can I support, sort of thing. That's an absolutely fantastic starting point. I think speaking for trans and non-binary community members, I think that they'd be very keen to access things that are more local and to be able to access things that don't take 5+ years in order to get your first appointment. If you're interested in working with trans and non-binary people, and in this case, we're talking about young people, then, there's ways you can approach that. There's, you've talked about the network and things like that. If you're LGBTQ+ or otherwise, and there's lots of people who are ready to support you and talk you through those things. I think I saw a question that was around, is it good to work with the person you're working with, the client, to figure all these things out? Absolutely, people will be more than welcome like the opportunity to talk through with you and co-produce what it is that they want. It's okay to admit when you don't know something. The worst thing is when people try to fudge through it and pretend that they know. It's very obvious when people aren't aware. It's absolutely fine for you to go, I don't know, but I'm willing to take you on anyway and work with you. Love it.
I think I would just add to that that wonderful thing, the internet, means it's very easy to find out a lot of things about both LGBTQ plus identities and trans and non-binary people. And I think it is beholden on us to educate ourselves as well, and not just wait for that, that client to kind of challenge us. So it is important that you actively engage and find out for yourself too.
Thank you. In fact, one of the questions is about other CPD opportunities and training events, maybe through different associations, but I don't know, Sean, if you've got any comments around that, or Zane actually as well.
Sorry, Zane, I was just going to say that I've been plugging the LGBT Foundation's How to Be a Trans Ally, because that's a really great starting point, and I know you were kind of keen to promote that.
Thank you. Yeah, I wrote that a number of years ago now, but I still see it popping up in places. I wrote a guide a couple of years back now that, as Sean said, is How to Be an Ally, which is very much a 101 on approaching things. And it was written to aim towards people who are very much not familiar with anything at all. It really avoids any kind of jargon. It really just talks like a person to you. It's even got a little bit of humor in there. I've also got an event on Wednesday, which is for professionals, which is on Trans Day Visibility, which is booking up really, really quickly. There's only a few spaces left, but I can drop that in the chat for people to have a look at in their own time.
Brilliant. There's also a question about support for family members. Is that something that your foundation does too, then?
Yeah, absolutely. For younger people, there's also Mermaids, Gendered Intelligence, the Proud Trust. They're all fantastic places. I think I answered a question with information about them for particularly supporting young people. We offer counselling free for LGBT plus people, but also counselling for people who are supporting trans people in their life and want to talk that through with people. I'm more than happy to signpost people as well. We have our email, which is trans@lgbt.foundation. We can signpost you from there. I will grab the other resources as well and make sure that they're put out to everybody.
Thank you very much. We're swiftly running out of time, so I'm just looking. Are there any questions here that either you, Zane or Sean, want to answer while we're still live? There is something about easy read accessible information for people with learning disabilities. I don't know if you have anything like that. If not, we can take that offline, Sean.
Yeah, that's something, I mean, like a lot of things, there's lots of areas where suddenly we're recognising the intersectionality of conditions as well. So we're keen to work on those resources. So yeah, that's something we can talk about later as well.
I'm just grabbing the Allies Guide.
Yeah. Thank you. Someone's asked about outcome measures for voice therapy.
Yeah, this is
that you would recommend.
If you join the SEN, for example, at Baggis, our SEN lead Naz gave a great overview of outcome measure development and kind of a review of the shifting changes, because as Zen talked about earlier, a lot of the terminology and a lot of the outcomes are being influenced by the way people perceive their own authentic identity rather than becoming very, very stereotypic female or male. So some of the tools that are being used are kind of being reviewed at the moment. So that's an area that needs updating. So yeah, people in the SEN are very happy to discuss that kind of issue.
Great, thank you. Any other final points before we
just dropped another one in chat, which is my safe binding guide as well, because it almost, if you're working with particularly transmasculine young people or older people as well, it almost certainly will come up, so it's worth being a bit clued up on it.
That's great, thank you, Zane.
There is a sixth form students actually very keen to, oh, the poll is now coming up, so I think that means that we're probably out of time. So any other questions we haven't answered live, we will get back to all of you. So thank you so much to everybody who's joined today, and thanks again to Zane and to Sean. It's been a fantastic webinar. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.